You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Wow, my voice is cracking. I got to go back to my opera lessons and see what's going on there. Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. We certainly appreciate you guys being here. You guys are the greatest audience in the world, the smartest people, 14 years and 1,400 episodes. If you guys aren't the damn smartest people by now, well, go back and listen to all 1,400 episodes. We're putting out 2 to 3 new episodes a week. Simon Schuster and Harper are auto-booking all of our podcast guests, and we have all sorts of other great, brilliant CEOs and minds that are on the show. So if you're not sharing the love, the knowledge, the experience, the glow that comes from all that knowledge that we disperse, why are you holding out on people? Really? Do you hate people? Like, what? Who hurt you? No, I'm just kidding, people. Share the love. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, the big LinkedIn newsletter. We're over on TikTok at Chris Voss 1 and the Chris Voss Show Podcast. And to join the mailing list, go to chrisvoss.info. You can check that out over there as well. Today, we had an amazing mind on the show. He's got a brilliant new book that's coming out, and we'll be talking about his thoughts on Web3. Alex Tapscott is on the show with us today. His book comes out September 19th, 2023. It's called Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier. So we're going to be getting into all the deets, as the kids like to say, the deets on all that stuff, and finding out more about his background and what goes into it. He is an entrepreneur, writer, and seasoned capital markets professional focused on the impact of emerging technologies such as blockchain and cryptocurrencies on business, government, and society. He's the managing director of the digital assets group at 9 Point Partners, one of Canada's leading investment firms, with more than $8 billion in assets under management. 9 Point launched the world's first carbon neutral Bitcoin ETF, which reached over 400 million in AUM. And he's the co-author of the critically acclaimed non-fiction bestseller Blockchain Revolution, translated into more than 19 languages, and has sold more than 500,000 copies worldwide. His other books, Financial Services Revolution and Digital Asset Revolution, were published in 20 and 22 respectively. Welcome to the show, Alex. How are you?
Chris, I'm great. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you as well, sir. Congratulations on the new book. These are always fun. Give us a .com or wherever you want people to find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, absolutely. You can learn more about me and the book, www.alextapscott.com. Pretty simple one to remember. The book's available for pre-order through that website and also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever you get your books.
There you go. And now, what is this internet you're speaking of? What is this about? Is that the tubes in the sky that one politician said one time? There's like some pneumatic things up there and the data goes back and forth?
Yes, a series of tubes, I think, is what he described it at back in the 1990s. That was during a time when on Capitol Hill, there are 100 senators and only one of them had an internet connection, and that person was Ted Kennedy. And I can only speculate as to why he needed an internet connection.
Well, I mean, he had to order booze. Or order that's my worst Ted Kennedy ever. We had the governor of Boston on and did my Ted Kennedy impression for him, and he said, I don't like you anymore. No, he did. He was very gracious. But so give us a 30,000 foot overview. We're beating up on Ted Kennedy. What kind of show
I didn't beat up on Ted Kennedy.
Too soon.
He was ahead of the game with his internet connection back when everyone thought it was a series of tubes.
I mean, maybe he was looking for excuses on people you drove off a bridge. Anyway, enough Ted Kennedy up jokes.
So my new book is called Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier. And it's about how the web and with it the internet are really entering a new era. And it's helpful just to understand a little bit of history. So the internet is a little different from the web. The internet itself was actually created in the late 1960s as an initiative of the Department of Defense. And it was designed actually to be a decentralized network that would stay up and running in the event of a nuclear attack. And it stayed basically that way for 20 years as a tool used by governments and people in academia and scientists and so forth. It wasn't until the 90s with the invention of the World Wide Web and the web browser that the web and the internet itself became a commercial tool, a tool that like people like you and I, were using. And, people might recall the early web, what we now call the .com era, as like a period of dial-up, right, where you had to hold up one of your phone lines, and so that you could download images at 10 or 15 kilobits per second. And the early web 1 as we call it, was static and was primitive. It was primarily a way to consume information. In the 2000s, the .com crash and the creation of some new technology created the conditions for a new web, what we call Web 2. And this new web, or the read-write web, became a tool for people to communicate and collaborate and share information online. So like the dominant business models of Web 2 are social media companies. And although individuals, you, me, and every other person in the world, creates all the value that contributes to the communities that we create online, we upload data, we upload our thoughts, we upload photos and images and so forth. Most of the value is captured by big platforms. So Web 3 promises a major rethink of the web. Instead of an internet controlled and dominated by big platforms, this new decentralized web and it allows individuals to own their own data, own their own identities, and to own their own virtual goods and digital assets. And that's a big leap forward that's going to transform a lot of different business models and marketplaces.
There you go. I thought World Wide Web was, when the Indians had the smoke thing, the whole that they get on the thing, the Native Americans. I'm gonna have to do some editing on this show. I already have notes. Let me make a pause here. Sorry about that, Alex. I'm gonna cut the Kennedy joke in this one, in the Indian comment. Gotta say PS or PR or whatever the fuck it is. So we'll cut those. So what I want to do with the Web3, there's a question I have, and I'm not sure if it's the right place for it. Anyway, this is all get edited, clearly. Yeah. So let me ask you this. I've heard rumors that, let me recut that. So let me ask you this. I've heard people, I've seen people arguing on the internet, namely Anderson, what is it?
Andreessen Horowitz?
It was Anderson Horowitz, Jack from, of course, Twitter, Elon Musk, and there's been a big argument that maybe there's certain VCs that are kind of more interested or have control or maybe big investments, or I'm not really sure what it is, because that's why you're here as a specialist. But I've heard all these arguments about it. And can you clarify some of that, kind of information that we're hearing as to what's true, what's not, and what Web3 maybe really is?
Sure. Well, I think the argument is primarily a semantic argument. There are people who are pushing the terminology Web3 while others are pushing the terminology crypto. And I think, honestly, that the two are, frankly, not as far apart as a lot of people might think. I mean, I view crypto assets, scarce digital goods that individuals can hold and then send peer-to-peer and may have other utility, as an important area of Web3 development, in the same way that email is an important component of the internet, or the web browser is an important component of the internet. But the internet itself, this canonical internet, is an umbrella term that captures more than just any single use case or application. So I try not to get involved in those kinds of debates. I mean, sure, there are some VCs who have made investments into Web3 startups. I think that the allegation is that they control a lot of these entities, and they're trying to pump their investments. But if you actually dig down and look at the holdings, their positions are relatively small. And I think most of the growth of this industry, which in which I would also, by the way, include Bitcoin and Ethereum and the other very large and established protocols, as being part of Web3. The helpful way to think about Web3 is as the read, write, own web. So what that means simply is that the internet is not only a tool to consume information, to read. It's not only a tool for computation, for us to upload data and to program the web. That's right. But it's also got a new framework for us to actually own digital goods. Now, Bitcoin is the first example of Web3 in action, in my opinion. Now, Jack and others might disagree because they view Bitcoin as being superior to other assets, and that's a different argument. But basically, the idea that Bitcoin allowed us to program digital scarcity for individuals to hold their own money, to be their own bank, to send that money peer-to-peer to anyone around the world, regardless if they had a bank account or an identity, as a clear proof point and use case for blockchain, the underlying technology, and Web3 in action. But what's important to understand is that Bitcoin is the beginning of the story. It's not the end of the story. In the same way that in the early 1990s, the killer app for the internet was email, but eventually we got the web browser, we got the mobile web, we got smartphones, we got the cloud, we got geospatial technology, apps like Uber and Airbnb. We got all these new innovations, and email remains critical. We communicate over email. Email is a protocol that billions of people use, and it's enormously valuable. If you could put a value on it, it would be valuable. In the same way that Bitcoin is and will continue to be very valuable. But doesn't mean it's the only innovation of this whole space. It just simply means that it's proof that this technology works.
There you go. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of things today, so people don't tune out on me. We're going to talk about the metaverse. We're going to cover ChatGPT. We're going to cover crypto. We're going to cover, what have I missed here? Web 3.0 we're talking about now. I think there's another thing that is big, VR, maybe AR or something, the new Apple stuff and web metaverse headsets. So stay tuned for all of it. We're going to get the deets on it all. Hi, folks. Chris Voss here with a little station break. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. We'll resume here in a second. I'd like to invite you to come to my coaching, speaking, and training courses website. You can also see our new podcast over there at chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Over there, you can find all the different stuff that we do for speaking engagements if you'd like to hire me, training courses that we offer, and coaching for leadership, management, entrepreneurism, podcasting, corporate stuff. With over 35 years of experience in business and running companies as CEO. And be sure to check out chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Now back to the show. So this is pretty interesting with Web3. You talk about it in your book where, like you mentioned before, we moved from the read-only web to the read-write web. And you frame it as the Web 3.0 or Web3 is the read, write, own web. And tell us about what that means.
Sure, absolutely. So in the book, we talk about different transformations. And the first major transformation is to assets themselves. Assets are foundational to all economic activity. It's how we represent value in every sector, in every business. And assets are going through their biggest reinvention in centuries, potentially. So, in the early period of human history, when this is worth it, the payoff is worth it. So bear with me. So, like in the feudal era, the main asset was land because the main industries were farming, logging, and mining, right? And so the wealthiest people in the world were the people that owned the most land. Wealth was also highly concentrated during that period. A catalog of who owned what in medieval England basically showed that the king and his favorite lords owned about 3/4 of the wealth, and the rest of the people owned basically nothing. In the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, we got the early stages of the industrial age, and that really kicked into gear in the 19th century with the invention of industrial capitalism. And so there, the most important assets became not land, but industrial plant and equipment, but also this new invention, stocks, bonds, bills of lading, paper assets. So sort of abstractions of value. So Cornelius Vanderbilt was not the richest guy in the world because he had the most farmland. He was the richest guy in the world because he had the biggest share of public companies that owned railroads and owned steam engines and owned steam ships, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the way in which we kind of wealth was created. Even today, who are the wealthiest people in the world? Well, it's Elon Musk and it's Jeff Bezos and others. Their wealth is primarily in shares of public companies. Mm-hmm. And as the economy became more complex, the assets that represent value became more abstract. We're now entering this new period where our economy is becoming more complex. It's becoming increasingly digital. And now we have a new digital toolkit to express value. And that is this thing called tokens, right? So in the same way that as the economy becomes more digital and becomes more abstract, it makes sense that assets are becoming more abstract. But also, tokens give us new ways for assets to become more democratized, for individual internet users to become individual internet owners, and to participate more fairly in the value that they create online. So a token, a lot of people confuse Bitcoin and crypto and tokens and all these other terms, right? But fundamentally, you can just think of a token as a container for value, in the same way that a website is a container for information. So a website can be anything, right? Like it can be a podcasting studio. It can be where you get the news, where you get the weather. It can be a social media site. It can be how you get your health records. It can be, where you get the sports scores, whatever. It's a tabula rasa for information of any kind: photos, images, video, text, you name it. In the same way that the website is a container for information, a token is a container for value, and it can be programmed to contain anything of value: money, financial assets, art and collectibles, what we commonly call NFTs. It can be used to contain shares of a company, other forms of financial assets, even votes in an election, or IP, or other scarce assets. It's something that is infinitely programmable. And once you wrap your head around that basic concept, you realize that the sky is effectively the limit on what tokens can do in the economy.
There you go. It's and one thing you talk about is this is more about giving people their own individual identities. I mean, now is that with Web3 more so, or I know with technically Web2, or you correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just gonna work off my assumptions here. Let me make that clear. People kind of became a brand. Like people on Instagram. Everywhere I go, I'm a brand. ChrisVoss.com. Whatever. I don't have ChrisVoss.com. That got away from us early on. ChrisVoss.net. The Chris Voss Show. I have Chris Voss LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. All the Chris Voss is pretty much on social media, except for TikTok. Damn, I'm Chris Voss 1. I got behind on that one. But that's my identity. Like people go, hey man, that's the dude and stuff. And I think that might have been Web 2.0, was it? But and now how is it going to be even maybe more so on Web 3.0? Yeah,
it's great. I mean, your examples illustrate the model of how Web 2 worked, which is that there's a virtual me out there and there's a virtual Chris Voss out there. And, that Chris Voss exists across many different platforms.
Yeah, there's two of them too.
Really? Well, that makes things harder.
It's worse, yeah.
I hope he's not your evil twin or something.
No, but he did hijack our brand in 2016. So, but that's another story. Brutal. Sorry, I digress.
Well, there's a Web3 solution to that as well. But the thing about the virtual you is it's not owned by you, right? It's owned by Instagram. It's owned by LinkedIn.
Oh, that's right.
It's owned by all these different platforms, and you provide all this data. You provide the social net, the social graph. You provide the content to all those platforms, and in exchange, you get access to a free service. Maybe you get to build your brand and your network. But the actual value of your brand, the data that helps to drive advertising revenue to those platforms, you actually don't really own or participate in it.
Yeah, I don't get any checks for that.
Exactly.
I get checks from YouTube.
Some creators, yeah, well, exactly. Like on YouTube and other platforms, creators are receiving some compensation. But in general, the bargain of Web 2 is you provide all this data and we'll provide you with a free service. And it's a trade-off we made implicitly without even really thinking about it. But over time, I think a lot of people are viewing it as a Faustian bargain, a deal with the devil, where we're providing all this information about ourselves, which we can't monetize and might undermine our privacy and might even lead to identity theft, as you've described it, right? Yeah. So the Web3 solution is one where basically you have a wallet. It's like a secure vault. And in that vault is all of your digital goods. And those digital goods can include things like Bitcoin, and it can include art and collectibles, but it can also include attributes of yourself, elements of your reputation and your identity. And that information is information that you control and you own. And only you can decide how it gets used, where it gets used, and if it gets monetized. And if it gets monetized, then you can get compensated for the use of that data. So there are several different companies and brands that are exploring how this might work in practice. A good example would be a consumer brand that wants to use your data to sell sneakers. Well, if that data is used, maybe you get discounts on your next pair or something like that. So, and that's something that you would have to provide consent in order to get for the company to get access to. Now, this is something that applies to consumer businesses, but it's also something that is more fundamental to the next big challenge for humanity, and that is around artificial intelligence. I'll stop there. A follow-up question on that, because people think of Web3 and crypto and artificial intelligence as being distinct realms, right? They're separated from each other, but in fact, they're quite interlinked.
Well, let's get into AI then, because and this will end up on the AI podcast too. Plug folks for the AI podcast. We've seen ChatGPT just explode. I have friends that are addicted to it; they can't get off it. It's like early Twitter, basically, for them. Yeah. And so, what's your vision as to how that's going to play out? And of course, like you said, is as you mentioned, it's not different. It's all part of the same big vision.
Well, I mean, the idea of ChatGPT is that, a large language model processes, reams and reams and reams of data, human speech, text, and so forth. And from there is able to predict or anticipate how to answer questions and to create content. So, we used to think of AI as some sort of like raw compute power that could, process, huge amounts of data information. But actually, AI, as it exists today, is mimicking human expression and human behavior. So, AI like ChatGPT and these other large language models aren't just, figuring out orbital patterns of stars and planets, which is what we think of computers as doing, but they're also writing poetry, writing sketch comedy. They are writing screenplays, they're creating art, or not, depending on your perspective, but they're creating visual representations of things, which in my view can be quite striking and quite stunning. But it's all derivative. It's all derived from things that have come before. So it's human writing and human art and human expression and human graphic design and all that other stuff. And so it's not doing anything original necessarily. So what's happening is that in order to get access to create a large language model that creates a lot of useful, valuable outputs, you need a lot of inputs. You need a lot of data inputs. And there's a lot of questions right now about if these large language models are actually using data without the consent of the people who provided that data. What they call the provenance? What is the origin of all this information that's getting fed into the machine? And also, how reliable is it? What is the veracity of this information? What's so funny about ChatGPT is the only thing it seems to do really, really well all the time is creative stuff like write poetry. If you actually give it like a math problem or ask it to answer a factual question, a lot of times it gets it wrong because the information going in is sometimes really useless. There's a really funny case of a lawyer who basically had ChatGPT write his entire argument in front of the court, and then he didn't bother to check the data that ChatGPT was using. The thing was absolutely riddled with errors, and he had to basically admit in front of the judge that he had AI plagiarize his brief or whatever.
And he might lose his law license.
He probably will. They're
not happy with it.
We should look at that up, actually. Anyway, so what does this got to do with Web3 and the intersection with AI? Well, for one, if individuals control their own data and they're the ones who provide permission for how it's used, then they can provide permission and authorization for large language models to use their data. Number one. Number two is that if they do provide it, they can actually receive compensation for it. So, a really good example would be a platform like, say, Reddit. So Reddit recently announced that it's jacking up the fees for third-party developers to access its API. And the argument is basically, it costs a lot of money to provide access to these APIs, and Reddit ought to be getting paid for it in some way. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the ways that they could compensate it is basically for individual users who are providing all this. Like Reddit is like a gold mine of large language model, data. It's all this people talking about stuff constantly and providing facts and data and opinions and so on and so forth. Well, what if you had a model where instead of jacking up the price of the API, you simply pass through whatever benefit there was to the individual users? What if they received a token that allowed them to get paid fairly for the value and data that they're creating? So you have ways for both proving the provenance and also ensuring that content creators get paid fairly. An easy analogy or way to think about this is like, imagine if all the data, imagine it's like a literal piece of data on a piece of paper. It going into the machine, imagine it's a literal machine, has a watermark, and that watermark says who owns it. And every time it goes through it, it scans it and sends a payment back to the person. That would be prohibitively expensive and complex with existing payment tools, but it would be easy to implement with a token. So if you want these large language models to continue to get reliable, useful data, and we want people to get paid fairly when their data gets used, the Web3 solution is the only way to do it.
There you go. It's going to be an interesting world here coming up in the future, trying to adopt to all the new things and everything else. The metaverse, has basically flopped recently, and Apple just announced their new VR headsets, or AR, I guess, more so headsets that technically aren't going to come out till next year. But it appears that if, anybody who knows what Apple does, I mean, they resurrected podcasts, they res a lot of stuff, and they make it mainstream and popular. Although I don't know, for what is it, $5,000 or $3,500 a headset, 3,500 a headset. I'm just adding zeros at this point. It's a little harder, I think, to go mainstream. It becomes kind of an elitist product for people that have money, and so I don't know. I imagine it'll set a foundation, but they kind of did the old trickaroo we always talk about technology of the pioneer gets all the arrows. So they let Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook take all the arrows, and now they're doing that. What do you see the future of that? Do you put any money in that succeeding, or VR and AR and all that stuff, or is it still like a long ways out?
I think that we're at an important inflection point, and I think that's actually true, Chris, for a lot of new technologies. VR and AR. I mean, that's an overnight success story that's been 50 years in the making. I don't know if people remember what was it called, that the Nintendo headset that I got as a kid in the 1990s. You could play Mario Tennis. I mean, it was a disaster. It was a flop of a product. Because the technology was not ready for prime time. And even a lot of this Oculus stuff that Facebook has released, it's one of those things that's found product market fit with early adopters. For example, gamers really like it because it creates an immersive experience, but it's not a mainstream product. And if you look at other technologies actually that have become really kind of popular or feel like they're hitting that inflection point recently, they too have had decades of false starts and flameouts and bubbles and everything. That's true for AI. That's true for the Internet of Things and connected devices. It's true for self-driving cars. Remember 5 years ago, everyone was talking about, in 5 years, you're going to have a self-driving car. And when it didn't happen, we all forgot about it. But actually right now, self-driving cars are on the road in San Francisco. And I think in a few years, are going to be rolled out nationwide. So, there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come, again, to paraphrase the expression. And I think we're seeing that playing out across a lot of these new technologies. Now, having said that, there's this view out there that, the metaverse and Web3 and virtual reality are all kind of jumbled up together, and they're all like the same thing, or they're all related topics. And it's true that they're all related, but there are some really important differences. So first of all, you can have virtual reality without the metaverse. If you put on a VR headset to, say, watch a movie or to, play a video game, you're in a self-contained environment. You're consuming content through a new medium. If for there to be, and then from there are virtual worlds. And that's the idea that, you enter into a shared virtual space with other people who are also in that shared virtual space. And that virtual space is persistent, and it's constantly rendered, and it's constantly updated. And you can consume content, do transactions, have interactions, and so forth. That's like what we consider like virtual worlds. But for me, in order for a metaverse to reach its potential, in order for the metaverse to have a second life, if you will, you need to basically have the same kinds of conditions in a virtual world that exist in the physical world. And one of the big conditions that exists in our world is that we have control over ourselves, and we also have rights over our property. So digital property rights can only exist in a metaverse with Web3 tools. So for example, like if you use Facebook's Oculus headset and you enter their virtual reality, you're not really like creating a new version of our reality. You're entering Disney World. And, Disney World is lots of fun. You can go on rides, you can buy stuff, you can have experiences, but fundamentally it's all fake. And in the end, it all benefits one single company.
Wait, Disney World's fake? You mean Snow White isn't real? And those dwarfs? I don't know.
So if we think people are going to spend more time online and more economic activity is going to move online, and maybe we go from a two-dimensional web that we look on our phone to a spatial web that's integrated with this technology, if that's really where we're headed, and I think that the launch of Apple's Vision Pro was a watershed, then I think that we need to have all the same rights in the real world that we in online that we have in the real world. And the only way that's possible is with Web3's toolkit of things like tokens, for example. So instead of paying a 30% fee to the house every time you buy something in Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, imagine you can transact peer-to-peer. Just like today, if you go on to Etsy or you go to a store or something and you buy something, there's not a 30% tax necessarily paid to some single company. If you want to trade a piece of art, an NFT, between different people, you're not paying a 50% fee to the house, which is what Facebook had envisioned. And even today, I think that what worries me is that a lot of these new virtual reality and augmented reality initiatives, like Vision Pro, are going to end up just perpetuating the same model that we have in Web 2, which is that you can get access to a rich array of services and you can have fun, but in the end, there's one single platform that's capturing most of the value. I think for it to reach its potential, we need to have those peer-to-peer tools.
There you go. I mean, I like to get paid for all my BS a whole lot more that I post, all my dog photos on Facebook. I like to get some money for that, but
you're joke, but peer-to-peer, like a Web3 social network would do something basically like that. So it's an interesting thing, to consider. It's like, how much are my little dog photos really worth? Like, how much is my BS really worth? I think you're underselling yourself because you've got a great brand.
Oh, wow.
No, but in all honesty, it's like, well, how exactly do we monetize that? And so in a lot of Web3 applications, the way that they launch is with a token. And basically, the earlier an adopter you are and the more value you add to the platform, then the more of the platform you earn. So, I was in university when Facebook came out, and I was an early adopter. I created a huge social network on Facebook. I added lots of photos and content, and I did it because it was fun and it was sort of like early internet, early Web 2 stuff, and it felt kind of innocent. But in retrospect, it would have been nice if, as an early adopter who helped them to achieve critical mass and build that network effect, that I'd actually gotten paid for it in some way or gotten compensated, if I had had ownership and governance rights. Well, that's basically how most Web3 applications are launching today. So if you're an early adopter of a Web3 application, Uniswap, decentralized exchange, or Compound, like a lending platform, the more you do on the platform, the more of it you earn. SX Network, that's a peer-to-peer sports betting website. Basically, instead of paying 5% of the house, every time you bet, you earn tokens that gives you a share in the actual entity itself. So, some really cool examples of how we're changing the economic model where internet users are becoming internet owners of the platforms and services that they use. And that's something that's really important. Now, going back to your example of, your dog photos and your posts about what's going on in your life, a lot of models are based on power users, right? So like there are certain power users like in video games. So most video games today use what's called a free-to-play model, where basically 98% of gamers aren't paying any money, but 2% of gamers are paying a lot of money. Now you might say, okay, the 2% of gamers are the ones that matter the most. They're the most valuable customers. And in a way, of course they are. But actually, if it weren't for the 98%, creating the environment and creating the rich, gameplay of those worlds, the 2% wouldn't be there to begin with. So actually, the people who aren't paying or who aren't like the power users or the big value creators are still getting creating a ton of value. The same is true on platforms like YouTube. Like big content creators may be creating tons of value, but they wouldn't be valuable if it weren't for their fans, right? So the idea of Web3 is, can we create models where everybody who's contributing to the success of something shares somehow in the upside?
There you go. I remember back in the day on YouTube, I was valued as a creator and part of their creator program that was exclusive back then. And, we made a lot of money off of it, but then they changed the rules on us. What with all these different new Web3 platforms you talked about, where, we can get paid for our value, what's to keep this from happening again with Web.2, where they're like, oh, you guys are making a lot of money now. We need some of that back. And, my checks just go, woohoo.
Yeah. Well, you've described the central difference between Web 2 and Web 3, which is that, you may be a content creator on YouTube and you might be very valuable and you may get compensated for it, but you don't have any say in how YouTube as a platform is run, right? Mm-hmm. You have no governance rights. The difference with Web 3 is that as an early, let's say in your example, you were an early contributor to YouTube and you were creating a lot of value for the platform. Well, if you'd earned a token, then that would have given you the ability to vote on matters that are relevant to that platform. Oh. So if they wanted to change their economic model and say content creators are going to get paid less share, well, you'd have the ability to have a say about that, right? Like right now, you're subject to the central bank of YouTube, so to speak, where they devalue the currency, right? They're like, okay, all of a sudden your contribution is worth a quarter less than it was before, and then it just is what it is. So in the Web3 model, the idea is that the contributors, the creators, the users, by earning a share in those platforms, can actually have a say in how they're run. And by the way, they may decide that as a protocol, as a community, they don't want advertising. Maybe the goal isn't to make money. Maybe the goal is something else. It's user experience. And that would be up to them to decide how that works.
I think that's why I like podcasting so much, because we pretty much control it. Although, if Apple wants to kick off their platform, they do most of the traffic for podcasting. But for the most part, we kind of control our own destiny, I think, for the most part. Other than if Apple just decides to go bankrupt one day, which won't happen. But
you control your destiny other than you're entirely beholden to one platform.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we're on Pandora and iHeartRadio and Spotify and all the places, but the people who deliver a lion's share of the business are Apple, and evidently there's some good changes they have coming down the pike. Let's get crypto in here.
Yeah.
Now, full disclosure, we're recording this early in June 21st, 2023. And so some of the data I'm going to give out here is applicable to then. The book comes out in September, which is when this will be released. So don't send me nasty comments about how I got this wrong in September. But right now, Bitcoin pricing at the beginning of the year was close to 15,000. On January 1st, it was 16,605, which was pretty much running around its bottom there for a couple months. And now it's up to, as of today's date, June 21st, 2023, 30,172. It's almost doubled. It's within 2,000, I think, of doubling. So given, what's going on with Bitcoin, it seems to be doing a resurgence. But then there's also right now, and then also the time is applicable, the Justice Department just went after, I think, Coinbase and who's the other big exchange?
I think you're referring to that, the SEC, not the Justice Department.
The SEC, I'm sorry.
We're sued Binance and Coinbase.
Binance, there we go.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting what's going on. It almost seems like a real attack from, as we mentioned earlier in the show, there's real democratization going on that's actually kind of potential to upheave governments where, it goes up against, their ability to sell their currencies and use them. I mean, the American currency, the dollar, is up until recently, the top producing, and I think it still is, but there's some challenges that are going on with Brazil, Russia, and China, is what everything is bought and sold on. And it gives us our economic power in ways we don't even realize, at least most of us. So what's your thoughts on cryptocurrency? There's still the FTX thing that has to process. There's been a lot of fallout, bankruptcies, and creepy things going on with crypto bros, as they like to call them. Tell me some of your thoughts on that. And maybe, is it going to get better under Web3, or maybe you might have more control from getting ripped off?
A lot of great stuff in there. So let me try and unpack it one by one.
I threw you the whole kitchen sink there.
Well, I'll tell you what, which is that because it's June 21st, anything I say about the price of any asset will be out of date by September. And the book Web3, the book I've written, is less about making. It's not really at all about making price predictions or calls on the value of any asset. It's more about some of these enduring themes and ideas. But I do think it is notable that we are seeing a resurgence today in the value of a lot of these different platforms. There's a couple of things I can talk about, and I don't want to go into too much detail because it will be out of date. But right now, Bitcoin and Ethereum, the two largest platforms, collectively represent 70% of the market value of all crypto assets. That is a higher percentage than it has been in a few years. There was a time, of course, when Bitcoin was the only game in town, and it was 100%. Now, my expectation is over time, and probably by the time people listen to this, I could be wrong, that share will have declined. And it will have declined for a couple of reasons. The number one reason why those names are succeeding more than others is because there's a lot of concern and uncertainty about the other assets, the other kinds of crypto assets that exist. Namely, based on the SEC's suits against those companies, are those considered securities? And if they are considered securities, then are any exchange or any platform that does business in those acting as an unregistered securities exchange? My opinion is that the issue is complicated and that many, or not, if not most, of those assets are not securities. And the problem is that we've got a set of rules that were developed in the 1940s. The primary test the government uses to determine if an asset is a security is a thing called the Howey test, which was used in a in a case involving an orange grove in Florida. So, I'm not sure we should be applying the test of a Florida orange grove 80 years ago to a new novel asset class. It's got fundamentally different properties than stocks and bonds and other financial assets. I think that in the next few months, we're going to see some more information come out of these suits, but also maybe a move from lawmakers to try and define these assets, what they are, and more importantly, what they are not. So going back to what's the connection to Web3, well, a lot of these really awesome models that I've described, the idea of like a user-owned platform for sharing content, or a user-owned market for wagering on sports, or user-owned exchange for trading stocks and bonds, all of those things involve the issuance of a token. And that token would get issued to people based on their contribution. So my view is that governance token is a new thing. It's a new primitive, as they call it. It's a new, like, fangled technology. It's not a stock. It's not a bond. It's not some traditional financial asset. But there's a lot of concern that the government's position on this matter will lead to them concluding that basically every single crypto asset in the entire world, with it maybe the exception of Bitcoin and Ethereum, is a security. If that ends up happening, I think that would be really unfortunate for the industry. In terms of the suits themselves and the approach the government has taken, the idea that this is all tech bros or crypto bros all trading digital playthings is not rooted in any fact whatsoever. In fact, crypto asset adoption, so the adoption of, say, Bitcoin or stablecoins as a payment tool, is far more popular in parts of the world where people are typically underbanked, or where the local currency is unreliable, or where in general incomes are a lot lower. So, for example, the company Chainalysis has ranked countries like Venezuela, Ukraine, Thailand, Nigeria, and Kenya as having higher adoption of this technology and this asset class than most Western European countries. For example, in the United States, people of color are more likely to own Bitcoin and own crypto assets, as are people who are unbanked, so people who don't have access to a bank account. And it makes intuitive sense, because if you need a way to move and store value, whether it's in some native asset like Bitcoin, or just in dollars and what's called a stable coin, this is a very easy and simple way to do it. There are so many places in the world, Chris, where the majority of people have access to a smartphone and an internet connection, but they don't have a bank account. Well, this is an easy solution to that problem. So we have to read past there's a lot of takes in the media which are frankly not rooted in fact. It doesn't mean we put on rose-colored glasses, but we have to look at these things on their merits. And on their merits, I think that in both of these instances, both in the need for greater clarity and also in the facts of who uses this, we see a much brighter picture than what you read in the news.
Wow. There's been more talk about, it's kind of ironic, and again, we'll cite the date here, June 21st, 2023. We have to do that too, because people who are watching the YouTube video 10 years from now and give me crap about stuff. And you're like, did you look at the date on the YouTube video? They're like, yeah, it's 99 cents on Amazon right now. It's not $500, Chris. And I'm like, that's a 10-year-old video. So anyway, I'm seeing right now the I think it's the ChatGPT CEO just basically was talking with Congress about how, we need AI laws, which is kind of interesting, because it's the close the door behind you sort of
totally
strategy. We've arrived. Now we need laws. We robbed the bank, and now we need. It's kind of like what. We mentioned the Kennedy. It's kind of like what John Kennedy's father. What was his name?
Joe Kennedy.
Joe Kennedy. It's kind of like what Joe Kennedy did back in the before the Great Depression, in the early Wall Street days. He was the guy who knew the best scams on Wall Street, and then I think it was FDR appointed him head of the SEC when they formed it, because he knew all the games. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to me that we need more regulation on that. We need regulation for automation, AI, and we need all those sort of new digital stuff. And what's disturbing is when you see these, you mentioned earlier how Ted Kennedy was the only one who had internet access. It's just disturbing to see a lot of these politicians. They do these Capitol Hill interviews, and they have no idea what's going on. They're just like, what's my login to Facebook? And the Google people are sitting there going, are you serious? Like, why are we here? So hopefully we can figure out a way to bridge this gap.
Well, I think what you're describing a couple of things. One is like the idea of regulatory capture, right?
Mhm.
Which is like, big companies get establish a big market position and then use their proximity to power to create rules that prevent competition, right?
Yeah.
And that's something we've seen play out in lots of different industries. The other thing you're describing is the so-called moral panic, where basically every time a new technology arrives, everyone like starts waving their hands in the air about how it's going to destroy jobs and destroy the world and everything else. We've just seen this play out since the dawn of the industrial age. You've probably heard the term Luddite. Luddites were people who were opposed to mechanized looms in early industrial England, and they were worried that the introduction of industrial looms were going to take jobs away from artisanal cloth makers. What ended up happening is that tens or hundreds of thousands of new jobs were created in the textile business because the technology improved productivity. Now, there were some negative consequences of that. Like, it's not like people working in factories were getting treated all that well or paid all that fairly. But the concern about jobs was unfounded.
But it did bring us Kim Kardashian, so it was pretty much a downer.
Did it?
We saw the looms turned out. Kim Kardashian went right to Kim Kardashian.
Yeah, the loom in Manchester, and then there's a straight line.
Rotary phones, Kim Kardashian.
Yeah, that meme of like the bricks, the guy like knocks over one domino and it hits a bigger one and a bigger one and a bigger one. It's like guy eats a bat, and then it's like tick 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 pandemic.
And the next thing's the Terminator.
Yeah, exactly. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so moral panics. And so, look, we've seen this before time and again. This isn't even the first moral panic for AI. I mean, we've had concerns about AI forever. AI is a big part of pop culture. I mean, the Terminator is probably like one of the most iconic examples of sort of the moral panic around artificial intelligence and computers in general. But you got to ask yourself, like, is there like a fixed amount of labor and fixed amount of economic opportunity? And if machines do it, people won't? Or will machines augment human behavior? In the same way that, the invention of the car maybe put a few furriers out of business, people made horseshoes, but it also created a heck of a lot more jobs and prosperity in the process. The invention of the computer, people thought that was going to reduce the need for data processors, people who handled punch cards, but it actually created way more jobs in data processing and also a whole bunch of other higher skilled activities that computers enabled people to do. And so, like, I don't know how this is going to play out. Maybe this time is different for real this time. Who knows? But I've got this feeling that, the concerns that we have around a lot of these technologies is something that humans seemingly have to go through every single time something comes along. And by the way, the same is true for Web3, and even the internet. So in the case of Web3, the concern is these are digital playthings. It makes it easier for people to speculate and gamble. And by the way, it's a tool that criminals use to avoid law enforcement. In the early 1990s, the criticism was this internet thing, it's full of misinformation, it's full of radical extremists, and it's only used for spreading and disseminating pornography. And there was actually, speaking of senators, there was a senator, I can't remember his name, but he used to walk around Capitol Hill. He used to have one of his aides go to Ted Kennedy's office and print off a bunch of internet pornography. And then he would carry this pornography around with him and waving it in his hands.
For congressional purposes,
yeah, for congressional purposes only. And this is all they have on the internet. It's just this thing for porno. And it just strikes me time and again that, it's like, sound familiar. The moral panic we see around, Web3. Okay, so people got their own a new way to move and store value. Yes, criminals will use it, but who else will use it? Hundreds of millions of other people. We've got AI, and this AI, could it be used to, write hate fiction or something, or do something awful? Yeah, of course it could, but it could also be used for something else. ISIS uses email and WhatsApp. We shouldn't judge the value of a technology on who its end users are. We should view it based on as a whole, how it's used by humanity. And so I think that it's too early to say for things like AI, but I get a feeling the concern here is overblown.
There you go. Well, you put it into context really well and box it up. I like the concept of how we have this fear of new technologies. I think one of our biggest problems too is stuff is moving so fast. Like, it's like every week I'm like, what do I have to keep up with now? I was getting really comfortable with the model that I had before, and a lot of my friends are freaking out right now. They're, a lot of them are in PR. They're like, oh God, we just got replaced. There's even people, like, hey, podcasts are getting replaced by AI, which is like, sure, go for it. I don't care if you can be as funny as I am sometimes. Go for it. And so people have a lot of fear of this stuff. Last before we go out, let's get a squeeze in here for NFC. Or NFTs, NFCs, that's a whole different thing. NFTs. I don't know what's going on with me today. I'm just thrown off from the whole thing. I'm just overwhelmed by the technology. So what are your thoughts on that? That seems to have bombed hard. And do you think there's a future in Web3 for NFTs?
Well, I think, again, you got to separate what the underlying technology is from, how it's priced in the market. I mean, like when the .com bubble burst in the early 2000s, like we didn't call it quits on the internet. When there was a panic in 1873 and a bunch of railroad stocks went under, didn't mean that the technology was not useful. It just meant that things had become overhyped and we needed a bit of a washing out. And I think that's what we've seen in NFTs. I mean, an NFT is fundamentally a provably unique digital asset. So, something like, say, a Bitcoin is not provably unique. Every Bitcoin has got the same sort of value, right? So if you have a Bitcoin and I have a Bitcoin, we can exchange them and we end up with the same amount of value. With an NFT, they're unique. And a lot of other things in our world are unique. Art is unique. Your house is unique. Even if you live in a subdivision where every house is the same, the price is going to be different for every home because of certain differences, right? Lots of agreements, business agreements, contracts are unique. Patents, every patent is unique and so forth. So there's all these different assets in our world already that are provably unique. NFTs are a superior tool to use to define something that is provably unique. I'll give you an example. So a piece of art. So traditionally in visual art, if someone sells a piece and then it gets resold, they have no way of capturing any value from the resale of that. Whereas with NFTs, you can program the asset so that if you create a piece of art and sell it to someone and they sell it again for something more than what they bought it for it, then you actually receive a share of the proceeds. And so far, NFTs have paid out over $1.9 billion of royalties on $45 billion. Wow. Transactions. Yeah. There you go. So if you think about even the value of $45 billion of transactions, a lot of that is from original sales of assets. And you compare that to, say, like Spotify. So last year, Spotify paid out $5 billion to creators in the form of music royalties. So in a single year, NFTs created more value for creators than Spotify did, for example. Holy crap. Yeah. So NFTs are a really powerful, new technology, new tool that we have to express something that is unique and valuable and to ensure that the owner gets compensated fairly for when it's sold and resold. And that's really all there is to it. So, it's like a lot of people go out and blow money on art, Chris, and then that money becomes worthless. And the same is true for NFTs. A lot of people blew a lot of money on a bunch of stupid, cartoon characters and stuff like that. And those things became worthless. But that doesn't mean that, visual art and paintings are not valuable, or that some can't be, or that, something that is unique and scarce digitally can also have the same kind of value.
There you go. So anything more you want to tease out in your book before we go?
Well, I will simply say that, the book is meant for anybody who, cares about the future and wants to play a role in shaping it. It's called, the book is called Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier. Now some frontiers are for experts only, or require Herculean strength or tons of capital. If you're climbing Mount Everest or you're venturing to Mars, only a few people can do that. But sometimes and often the most bountiful of frontiers have been sort of driven forward by people who either by way of circumstances or because of ingenuity pushed them forward. And the good news about Web3 is that it's everyone's opportunity to push that frontier forward. They said in the 1990s and 2000s that Silicon Valley was a tech Galapagos, meaning simply that it had the special combination of capital and talent and tech and government R&D that led to this unique and curious species of technology company that went on to kind of dominate, the industry. All I can say is that this time is different. Web3 is emerging at a time when technology tools and capability and access and capital are more distributed than ever before. And Web3 is not something that's going to be created in any single place. It's going to be created everywhere by everyone. And it's all happening kind of at once. So to paraphrase the movie. So, they say if technology is really something that makes the world flatter. Web3 is going to be a steamroller. And this new flatter world, more connected world, is one I think that also might be more prosperous as well. And that, more than anything, is a reason to root for this technology and to understand it a lot better. And I hope you check out my book as a result.
Definitely do. They really should. Alex, it's been wonderful to have you on. Very insightful, and we'll see how this data holds up 3 or 4 months from now. Maybe the whole world will end, and it'll be a nuclear bomb, and like everything will have died technology-wise by September 19th. Well, but hopefully it won't.
If that's true, then data on a podcast will be the least of our worries.
That's true. And I won't have anybody writing comments on my thing like, you were wrong. So there you go. Order up, folks, wherever fine books are sold. September 19th, 2023, Web3, charting the internet's next economic and cultural frontier. Alex, give us a .com too for you before we go, so people can find you on the interwebs.
Sure. People can find out more at www.alextapscott.com. And also, you can follow me on Twitter at AlexTapscott. Post a lot of great stuff, or at least I think it's great. My mom thinks it's great. But lots of good stuff on Web3 for people to check out. Too.
There you go. That's my mom's the only one who listens to the show. So that's every day. In fact, I hate it when she listens because she'll give me suggestions. She's like, you should not swear on the show and stuff like that. So anyway, thank you, Alex, for coming on. Thanks to our great audience for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you guys. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss. See us on TikTok, Chris Voss1, and Chris Voss, the Chris Voss Show Podcast on TikTok. There's 2 channels over there. And also, if you want to be on the new news list of all the cool things that are coming out and the great authors we have putting out, go to chrisvoss.info, chrisvoss.info. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.